Tim, it's always good to see you. How are you doing?
It's great. I think it feels like it's been a while, maybe like a couple of weeks since I saw you last, doesn't it?
Well, we do have time scheduled on the calendar every other week, and sometimes we record. Today's the day that we're going to record, and sometimes we don't record. And sometimes we end up not seeing each other because either something comes up on your side or something comes up on my side. So things good?
Everything's great. How have you been?
Things are good. Things are good. I'm in business development mode, primarily because, and this happens periodically, you lose a big account for any number of reasons, and then it creates this gap inside your book of business. And that is the stage that I'm in the middle of the summer, which is typically not the best time of year to have one of those gaps, but it's a good reminder, always be creating pipeline. Like you create the pipeline, and then you develop that pipeline and you remove a lot of the lumpiness that ends up happening inside the business. So other than losing an account of here in the last quarter, things are good. It's onward and upward.
Yeah. And I get it. Like, cause it's like, we both help people on a temporary basis or on a fractional or a contract basis. And that's what you're there to do. You're there to do something, and everything comes to an end at some point. And I think sometimes when you're on the consultant or a fractional side, it maybe happens a little bit more quickly than it does when you're a permanent employee, but every relationship has to start and stop at some point, And so I get it. Yeah, I get it. And we've had stuff like that happen this year too. And then, in the end, it's gotten replaced by something that's bigger or more aligned, right, with what we really want to do. So I think we've all been there.
Yeah, well, and we'll all be there again. Like it's one of the beauties of doing this kind of work, or benefits of doing this kind of work, is you can ramp up really quickly and then you can wind down really quickly. Both of those things can happen. So the reason why fractional work doesn't necessarily work for everybody is some people aren't comfortable with those bigger swings.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are a little bit more comfortable with those bigger swings. So you start the way I like to look at it is you get, and this could feel a little bit like baseball, and I'm not a huge baseball fan. I'm aware of the game called baseball, but
yeah,
you have singles, doubles, triples, home runs, and grand slams. You get a couple of those singles, even laying down a bunt or doing something to get on base helps create other opportunity. That's the kind of stuff that keeps the lights on. And you may get on base at a higher percentage, likely, you probably know the numbers. You get on base at a higher percentage than you typically hit grand slams. Primarily because you've got to get at least 3 people on base in order to hit one of those grand slams. So think about the way that you structure your business. What's the foundational stuff that you have in place, the singles? How do you create opportunities for some of those doubles and triples? And then where do you optimize when you get a chance to have a grand slam and take advantage of that situation? So there you go, a little baseball.
Well, it was funny because when you were telling me about this, we talked about big swings, right? And I know you're not talking about big swings this way. You're talking about big swings and ups and downs of being a business owner. But on the other hand, one thing about doing what we do and doing it the way we do it is that in order to hit a home run, sometimes you have to have a big swing. So maybe that's it. And to be fair, you talked about grand slams and home runs and not being the biggest baseball fan. And I should clarify that a grand slam is a home run, just with the bases loaded. It's the same thing, just different conditions. But yeah, that's the game of baseball, and definitely had some reminders of it. I was actually just at 3 Colorado Rockies games last weekend, and they didn't win. They don't win much, but they can take a few bigger swings, right? So
what'd you think of the park?
So it's actually really hard for me to go to other parks because I'm always comparing it to Seattle, and that's not a good thing. It's not, for me, that comparison is the thief of joy, On the whole, it was actually a good park. I don't know. Have you been to Coors Field or no?
I've not been in the ballpark. I've been to Denver and have been by the ballpark and walked by the ballpark, but I've not been in the ballpark.
So it is a nice park, right? And there's a lot of people that would put it in the top, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it was definitely a nice park, and I'm not going to take away from that. one thing that it was missing that a lot of my favorite parks have is that I went into the home plate entrance to try to, to try to see like the grand entrance, so to speak, right? Like home plate entrance is usually the one that if you're going to enter anywhere is like the biggest one. So like, for instance, if you go to Seattle, right, and you walk in the home plate entrance, there's a big rotunda, high ceiling, a chandelier made of baseball bats, escalators, right? You're coming into the park, right? And when I went to the home plate entrance at Coors Field, it kind of just felt like I was going in another entrance or another gate. And I just kind of went right to the concourse. And it wasn't that part. I would probably do and want to be like more majestic, if that makes sense, or more like there should be more grandeur to it or whatever you want to, however you want to put it. But other than that, the park was fine. The food was good. They have, I think, $3 beers if you go to the rooftop before the games. That's nice. I mean, the team is struggling, but that was fine. I mean, true to Coors Field reputation, I saw a lot of home runs. That was cool. And on the whole, it was a nice park. But that was the one thing that I noticed that, like, for a lot of people say Coors Field is one of the classic parks, like one of the modern classics. That's the one thing that I would want to see in a modern classic is that entrance, right? So, I mean, heck, even the Tampa Tropicana Field has one. I mean, it looks like a 90s shopping mall, but it has one. So, so it's like, that was the one thing for me. Yeah.
So here's one of the ways that I think fractionals can really help, or at least I believe I can help inside organizations, is this whole design for experience perspective. And it's interesting that you're talking about the experience you have when you walk into a ballpark. And if you're constantly going into that ballpark every day, you can lose sight of the details that make the experience different for your customers. So you might be so close to what you're doing from a product perspective or a service perspective, whether you're operating in a mall, Tropicana, or you're operating in an office environment, or you're operating in a restaurant or operating wherever. There's an experience that you create. And if at any point that experience does not align with the expectations that you've set with your customers, you're going to create a lack of integrity, and you're going to start to create risk, and you're going to start to create a lack of trust. And that lack of trust, that lack of integrity creates that risk and will create situations where things will start to break down, especially under high stress, which will typically lead to or can lead to losing a customer. So interesting way to bring the conversation around, even though I'm the one who brought the conversation around, but here we go. What do you think about experience? What do you think about designing for experience?
I think it's vital. Like, I think, when I think about everything that you do, right? Everything that you do as a professional, doesn't matter if you're a fractional or not, you want to think about the experience that you're creating for people, right? You need to create an experience that makes them believe, think, and feel, and for good reason, not just like fakely doing it, but believe, think, and feel that you are helping them, right? And you're helping them get ahead with what they need and what they want, whatever might be, right? And that experience, simply put, needs to create confidence for them. It needs to create confidence that they're getting what they want, right? And as a fractional, it's vitally important, because I don't know about you, but one thing that I've noticed, so a lot of the times when we do fractional work, it's based on people, right? And so one of the things that we really need to do for our experience is that we need to manage the expectations of how quickly things can happen, because things can happen quickly. But a lot of times when we're making disruptive change, when it comes to people and people strategies, things happen, right? People leave. People identify themselves as this isn't the right fit for them, or you find out and then you have to make a decision, or, all of those things. And when people leave, or you need to make those types of changes, or you need to respond to something, maybe it's not a people change. Sometimes you just need to respond to something faster than you had in the original plan. So you're trying to build all these strategies out and do all the really proactive work. Then you have to move quick, and it sets you back on how quickly that proactive work can come. And so one thing that you really, really, really need to do is you need to manage expectations, right, on what's going to happen, right? Look, if we fix all this stuff, and we're going to fix all this stuff, it's going to take time, firstly. And secondly, there might be some bleeding. And every time there's some bleeding, we're going to get set back on that stuff, just so you know. But I promise you, and I can guarantee you, every time you do have that bleed, you're going to come back better for it. And it will not feel like that all the time, right? Because it's like, oh, we just got a setback. But I find that you really need to like, I don't know what your work and what you do primarily, but for me, you need to manage expectations around hiccups and what's going to happen, right?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things you want is you want this consistency across your team, this kind of standard that's going to happen where people are able to keep doing the work that's necessary in order to move the business forward. And if you can reduce the amount of ups and downs by bringing someone else in to help manage those, it can have a significant positive impact on your business, meaning people will be able to focus on the things that they do really, really well, while someone else comes in and helps shift perspective and open up your mind to new ways to either design for a specific experience, create a new experience, overcome some challenges that exist inside the business. And I think it's kind of like, or when I think of fractional, it's kind of like bringing someone into the house to take care of odd jobs. So I can bring a handyman into the house to take care of rebalancing some ceiling fans or going through and fixing some of the irrigation lines. I could go out there and do it myself. It's not my area of expertise. It's not my skill set. It doesn't bring me value or bring me joy or energy by going out and doing the work. And the reality is I probably could do more useful things with my time than spending time working on that other thing. The other side of it is they're an expert in that specific area. They may come in and be able to do it really, really, really fast and make sure it's done very, very well. You're going to pay for that kind of experience. You're going to pay for that kind of expertise, and you want to pay the right way to go through and do that because you don't want to have to redo a lot of the work over and over again. Anyway, a couple of different parallels.
Well, and that parallel rings true too, right? Like, I mean, even in those situations too, it's like the handyman situation or the handy situation. There are every times where there's setbacks there too. And I find that, so like, I think too, like the way to, and it's not apples to apples, right? But I think the way to, in some of the strategic stuff that you and I help on to manage those expectations is be upfront, right? About what may or may not happen. And also be really smart about the types of timelines you try to build or commit ourselves to, right? And I think, even that handyman situation is no different, right? They're going to be smart about timelines. They're going to be smart about what they see. They might get setbacks. They might find that, part type A doesn't fit thingy type B, right? For lack of a better term. And they do their best to carry stuff, but it's always a game, right? Of managing expectations and exceeding them in whatever way you do that. It's no different when I worked at Disney. I mean, when I worked at Disney, we could handle high expectation and follow through with them. But the reason why we could exceed expectations time and time again is because we manage them properly as well, right? If you think about it, even when you go there, a lot of times that you get into a queue, the reality is that the time on the queue that they tell you how long it's going to be is a lot of times much higher than what you're going to experience. Why? So that way you're not wondering, right? What am I going to experience? Or you get to the front of the line, you say, that wasn't 60 minutes, that was 35. And you feel good about it, right? Everything that we did there was a game of managing expectations in some way and doing your best to over deliver where you could.
So you're saying it's okay to mislead people?
Well, and to be fair, sometimes they do it for traffic flow too, right? They will post times that way because they know you're on your app. And so they'll post times to divert people from point A to point B. And so I guess, yes, Mike, they are misleading people, or are they managing their expectations? I don't know.
It's a good way to look at it. I think there are certain objectives that we have based on, and if you're clear around what the objectives are and the expectations and experience that you want to create, you may need to do certain things to create a better experience or manage those expectations appropriately or create lead flow or demand flow or traffic flow or whatever that thing is. So knowing what the job to be done is of the information or of the tool is really important. And that's one of the challenges I see across many of the organizations I've had a chance to work with and that work with currently is we are not familiar, or folks inside the organization are not familiar with the concept or idea of jobs to be done. They've not read Clayton Christensen's work on this. Have not been exposed to it. And if you haven't been exposed to jobs to be done framework, take a look at it, do some research. And there's been videos where I've talked about it in the past, both in the context of managing meetings, specific jobs to be done of a meeting. When you start looking at the work that's happening, the tools that you're using, the time that you're putting toward, the resources that you're putting towards something, and look at it through the lens of a jobs to be done perspective, you'll be more efficient and effective with those resources and intentional when making certain decisions as you go through it.
Totally. Because you have that understanding, you've aligned to it, right, as you go through.
So you brought up Disney. So let's talk a little bit about some of the experience that happens there and the design for experience there. For anybody who's listening to this, who's not had the opportunity to go into a Disney park, or even those who've had a chance to go into a Disney park, when you walk into the Magic Kingdom, you go through a portal. That is part of the experience. You start to suspend reality and you move into a different environment. As you walk into the different environment, there's a point in time where you see the main focal point of the Magic Kingdom, or inside Disneyland, which typically is a castle. There'll be something big that's out there. You don't see it when you're walking in. You see it after you walk in, after you go around a circle, and then it reveals itself. That to me is designed serendipity. The castle has always been there, and it didn't move. It didn't just get created, but it was out of sight, out of mind, out of your perspective until it wasn't. So you can design these kind of experiences for your customer, that draw where even though you know what's going to happen next, they get to discover it on their own, in their own time, based on the way that you design the stepping stones for them to walk through.
Totally. As well, like you've just pointed out to me too, is that, so in Disney speak, we call that a weenie. Have you heard that term before?
I have, only if because I've watched the Santa Claus, and I know that was one of the toys that was it Judd, the dude that's in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, who now is also then the stepdad in the Santa Claus. He wanted his weenie, and he just didn't get it when he was a kid.
So in this case, weenie means something different. Oh, you mean the wiener? Oh, the Oscar Mayer wiener whistle, and then Santa Claus makes it appear. Yeah. Okay, I remember that now. I forgot about that. Okay, and then he gets it, and he's happy. No, so a weenie in Disney speak is something that makes you want to keep going, right? To draw you. Okay, so when you enter the Magic Kingdom, Disneyland, right, and you go onto you go onto Main Street, then it's like you said, Mike, it draws you in, and then the castle, as you see it, like you don't see it right away, and that's designed, that's deliberate, right? When you see it, it also draws you in and it makes you want to move towards it, right? And then once you get to the center of the park, or the hub as they call it, then there's different weenies all around it that make you want to go to the different lands. And, I think you just mentioned it, like your customer experience, we know what's coming next, right? We know what needs to happen next, but your customer likely two things. They need to stay interested in your process in a way that they know that you're taking care of their problem, or you're helping them take care of their problem, you're being the guide to their hero. The other thing is that they probably can't process everything between point A and point B to get from start to finish. And so you need things along the way to keep them going, right? To draw them in, to give them more information. You need your weenies along the way, right? And so I think, you mentioned how, the guest experience at Disney is deliberately designed so that way you don't get the reveal until you get the reveal for a reason. But I also think that the other side of it is that you need little things, in different points in the process, different points throughout the experience, right? They're almost like little nuggets of something of what's to come, to draw your customers, to draw your clients in and keep them going through the process and keep them interested in the process in a way where at each point where you might drop a weenie, you are showing them that you're showing them what's next, or you're keeping them going, or you're showing them another way that your problem is being solved, right? Or that they have your personal attention, right? And so, I think you need things along the way that show them that things are being taken care of and keep them engaged in the process and make them want to keep walking that path with you. Does that make sense?
It does. And the way that I've talked about this before is in the context of designing for customer experience, specifically around decision making and
Yeah.
looking at it along a board game like the game of life. And what ends up happening is you want to get from A to Z.
Yeah.
So sometimes you don't even know what Z is, but let's just say that we know what Z is. We've established what this goal is and we know where we are. Well, now we've got to lay out the path to get there. And jumping from A to Z is really, really hard. There's a lot of risk. If you don't own a helicopter, it's really hard to get from base camp at, I don't know, I've never climbed Everest, but I imagine it's actually, I could go to climbing Camelback here locally. It is really hard to get from the bottom of Camelback to the top of Camelback in one step. In fact,
Right.
it's impossible. So what you do is you could either take a straight line up, which would be extremely difficult and you're not going to achieve that, or you can work your way around the path. And even that, the path is going to be difficult. It's going to be a challenging hike. But around each area, you're going to have different conversions, different waypoints that you work through. And you can lay out these weenies out there in the process to help people convert to the next logical step. The challenge I see inside organizations is very rarely do people lay out those steps, and very rarely do they look at their data to determine where are we missing on our conversions. In the hiring process, I imagine you could look at it and say, well, if you're missing people at the signature, signing off on the offer, then there must be something that's different between what happened all the way through the journey and when that offer is delivered. But before the offer, in order to make the offer successful, there probably has to be something else that happens before that. And before that, there's something else that happens before that. And before that, there's something else that happens before that. When I'm hiring people, my process over and over again, same thing is I do an initial conversation with someone. Just want to see if we could hold a conversation, see a scenario where we would functionally work with each other. The next stage is put them through a scenario, have them demonstrate skills. If they demonstrate skills, now the probability of success increases inside the business. And then if they demonstrate those skills and demonstrate that they're coachable, because the work that we do is really, really hard. So I'm testing for internal versus external locus of control, leaning on some of the work that you're extremely familiar with, which behavior or motivation based interviewing with Carol Quinn. I'm doing that quick test to see if they have an internal versus external locus of control. If they're coachable and they've got the skills, then now we start to work through the more nuanced detail around fit from an organization perspective, fit from a compensation perspective, fit from a timing perspective, all that other kind of stuff. There's a process that everybody goes through. If I jumped right from first conversation or even just reviewing a resume to doing job offers, the risk is so high that we hire the wrong people inside the organization. And now we negatively impact their families and impact business. So that's how I think about this kind of taking a design-oriented approach to building out processes and creating space for conversions to happen and identifying how we want to change if we're seeing things get stuck in some of those conversions that we expect or behavior's not what we expect. What do you think?
No, I agree. Like, if I were to take basically everything that you've just said, right, and work it out, it sounds like there's just got to be weenies all the way, right?
Say that again.
There's got to be weenies all over the place. Like,
Place. Right.
yeah, it's what are your checkpoints and how are you communicating them and what are and are you having checkpoints, right? You don't go from point A to point B and say it's finished, right? It's what are your steps along the way that you're taking, right, to get it done, for lack of a better term, right? And it's like, if you don't do that, then you're going to disappoint your customers, you're going to disappoint your stakeholders, you're going to disappoint your internal customers, right? And there will be, and most importantly, the reason why is because of a massive lack of clarity, right? Every step along the way. And so, yeah, I think that's really what it is in the day, right? What are you doing to make sure that you are creating clarity for people? And then you're also giving them something like, it's almost like keeping them in the story, right? It's like, how are you, what story do you need to write to get it done properly, right? What does the narrative need to be? And then how do you keep people engaged in that story from point A to point B? And then you keep it rolling. Yeah.
Why do people struggle with this?
Oh man. Where do we even start? I think there's a few things, right? So if I had to think about it, I don't know what you see, but I would see there's just a lot of people who don't want to do that work, right? And so let's get real, right? Not everybody's motivated to actually do stuff and follow through and want to be the best. And I think sometimes there's some other stuff too where you have to temper, psychologically being a high achiever and all that type of stuff. And I get that. But the reality is that I don't know if everybody wants to think of things that way. And then a lot of people who say that they do, they struggle to actually follow through on the work afterwards. And I think there's a few things. I think there's a lot of people in general that have pigeonholed themselves into roles that they don't really like. So, I mean, they're not motivated or passionate to do the work that's required. But I also think too, like even for a lot of people who are in the right space, it's hard to do it as quickly as we want to do it. And I think, to be honest, one thing that has not helped is that I think we now have information overload, a lot of us. Like we get so much information from so many different places that it makes it difficult to focus on one thing and execute as well. Not that it's an excuse. We have to learn how to figure that out. And the real motivated people will learn how to break through that noise. But I honestly think, Mike, that the biggest issue is a lot of people are not in a position that's the right fit for what they need to do. And I think a lot of people just grit their teeth and get through it because a lot of people think the role is called work because it's not fun. And so they don't think about, the fact that they could actually be in something that they're motivated to do because work wasn't supposed to be fun anyway, if that makes any sense. And I just think a lot of people are in the wrong position.
But like more specifically, like why do people struggle with the whole idea of taking a design oriented approach to an experience?
I think the biggest, if I had to pick two words,
Yeah.
self-discipline. All that other stuff I just talked about is likely a lot of root cause around what can cause that, but two words, self-discipline. What do you think?
When you say self-discipline, what do you mean by that?
The ability to finish what you start
Mm.
and to focus on it until it's finished and properly define what finish looks like. So you also don't get into a situation where you don't know when to let go either, right? So that happens too.
Yeah. So, I mean, like at an individual level, I can kind of see the staying through and working through the process, having those pieces play a really big role. The piece that I'm kind of more interested in is like as leaders, why do we struggle with the idea of creating an experience that leads to desired results?
Sorry, say it again. I'm processing what you.
So as leaders, why do we struggle with the idea of building an experience, designing an experience that leads to specific results?
Oh man. I think if we were to get really deep with people, a lot of it is insecurity, right? And things that we tell ourselves. And, I think that really is what it is. I mean, and that our ability, like it's a mindset thing, I think that's what I'm really trying to say is that it's mindset. And we could dig in and peel away all the layers of everybody's minds all day long, but it's really just, it's a mental game. It really is. I mean, like so many things in life, it's that ability to have that mindset and that mental, like your mental fitness, right? Your mental health up to speed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a good thing.
I think so. Mindset's a really important place. Like, and when I look at mindset, I've been working through this a lot lately relative to just being more clear in the way that we communicate the things that we're working on inside the business. Mindset for me is attitude, belief, and clarity of definition. So attitude, A-B-C-D, attitude, belief, clarity of definition. When it comes to things like leadership, my attitude and belief and clarity of definition is leaders build leaders. Leadership starts with self. So attitude, leaders build leaders. Belief, leadership starts with self. Clarity of definition, leadership is how we move forward. So if you're bought into the idea that leadership is how we move forward and leadership starts with self and leaders build leaders, then one of the skills that you can build to help create that forward motion is design. And when you look at design through the lens of leadership, it is your obligation as a leader to lay out stepping stones that support the growth of both your team, your business, and your customers. And if leadership starts with self, it is your obligation to lay out the stepping stones for yourself that support the growth inside that journey. And to Tim's point around discipline, that self-discipline and the mindset and the perspective that you take around how you build this out, a number of people struggle with the idea of design. They think that things just happen. So they allow things to happen organically. Think about it. Anytime you drive around, if you drive to work, there are many times where you probably drive to work or drive to the grocery store, drive to your parents' house or drive wherever. And midway through the drive, you're kind of like, well, how did I get here? Like you don't remember all of the different turns that have happened. Now, there are a number of times, though, where you've gone through the process of saying, hey, you know what? I know the fastest route to get here is by going down this street to this street to this street to this street. And if you work backward, you design backward, a covey thing, design backward, execute forward, design thinking piece. If you design backward and execute forward, you can start to work backward from that end point, that Z point or the B point, and lay out individual stepping stones to help you get through. And the more stepping stones you put in place, the higher the likelihood of success that you have, the lower the risk is.
Yeah.
However, the more stepping stones you put in place, the more work and that you're putting in there, and that can lead to its own set of risk. So if I could knock people over the head, what I would do is I would suggest that they design backward so that they can execute forward. Take a simple approach, reduce all of the unnecessary components that are in there, as simple as possible, complex as necessary. Then start working that process in life. And as you work through that process, look at the data and start to identify where you're converting, where you're not converting. And if you're not converting, what are some of the extra steps you can add in to help simplify the conversion? If you are converting consistently, what are some of the steps you might remove to help simplify the approach?
Yeah.
And I think ultimately what ends up happening is people don't think this way. They just go out and do, and they think the more we do, the better, the greater chance we are that we're going to be able to be successful. And ultimately, if they design for success, they can create that success and accelerate speed to impact. That's my perspective.
I think you're right. And the thing is too, is that like one thing that really sticks out to me, what you said, is that people like to create a web and a hive of activity. Doesn't mean it's moving anything forward, right?
Yeah.
Are you spinning your tires, right? And you mentioned that you use the term speed to impact quite a bit, right? And for good reason, right? It's like, if you are constantly spinning your tires, you don't have a plan to move forward, there is no impact, right? There is no speed to impact. There's no speed, period. You're just spinning tires. And so, yeah, I mean, and I think the question is, if you don't lay out those stepping stones and you don't know where you're going, right? You need to get from point A to point B, but you haven't set out any stepping stones along the way. So you just focus on point B and your tires just spin like crazy and you don't know how you're going to fix it. And I think you mentioned too, a lot of leaders don't do that for themselves. It goes back to that whole idea. Like if you don't lead yourself first, then you can't lead others, right? You just can't. And a lot of people who do lead others don't lead themselves first. And so what's the result, right? And it permeates throughout the teams that they lead.
Yeah.
You set the tone. 100%.
Good conversation, Tim. Anything else on this to go into? Anything we didn't cover that we should have?
We could be here all day doing that, and I have to get ready for Canada Day tomorrow. But no, I think it's what I liked about this is that we had two different points of view of coming together the same way, right? Or coming together in the same idea or points, and why progress is important and how to map it out. And I think the big thing is Mike, I really like what you said at the end about how people aren't mapping out their own success as leaders. And the reality is that if you're not doing that for yourself as a leader, then you're not doing it for your people, your customers, right? And the first step to being able to deliver that customer experience, going back to our first question, and all the weenies along the way that we talked about, or all the different points, is to do it for yourself. And it's vitally important because it influences how everybody else feels it, and influences how everybody in the customer side experiences it, right? 100%.
Yeah. If you don't have a process, how can you expect to achieve results, repeatable results, if you don't have a process?
100%.
So if you're not achieving the results you want, take a look at your process. If you don't have a process, start building it. If you need help, give Tim a call, give me a call. Tim, where can people see what you're working on?
Yeah, for sure. So our website is bestculturesolutions.ca, Tim at bestculturesolutions.ca. And I think we need to share where people can get your help because we help people in different ways. And yet sometimes the same way when it comes to helping find the right fractional.
So on my side, go to findmycatalyst.com. You'll find your catalyst there. Everything is there in the context of leadership, revenue, and operations. If you're looking for someone to help you, or you're looking for help in either of those areas, give me a ring. If you know somebody who would find this conversation valuable, please share it with them. The shares help us. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking different about yours?